evening. It's a pleasure to welcome back to Harvard the Honorable Larry Summers, the Secretary of the Treasury. And I should say that a few years ago, in '94, I was on a trip and with another Harvard professor, and we were in all places in Oman, while the Secretary of the Treasury was meeting with the Omani Minister of Finance. And as we whiled away some time, I asked my fellow Harvard professor, how long are you going to stay in the government? He said, oh, another year or so. Well, that Harvard professor is Larry Summers, and he's had a pretty good run for his money. You might even say that he was genetically programmed for this. Larry has both his parents are economists, and he has two uncles who are Nobel laureates in economics. So it's not surprising that he earned his PhD in economics and that he was among the very rare select group of young economists who won the John Bates Clark Medal, which is given every 2 years to the outstanding American economist under the age of 40. So that he rose to be the 71st Secretary of the Treasury is, I suppose, predetermined, but I think he deserves some credit as well. Larry started after he was an undergraduate at MIT, got his PhD here in the economics department, then went to the President's Council of Economic Advisors, joined the Harvard Department of Economics as a professor, and then was a professor until '93. He then went to the World Bank where he was, till '91. He was chief economist of the World Bank from '91 to '93. And in '93 joined the Clinton administration, first as Undersecretary of the Treasury for International Affairs, where he dealt with such nice problems as the Mexican peso crisis in '95. He became Deputy Secretary, and then of course Secretary of the Treasury. If all of our Harvard students and professors did as well as Larry Summers, we would be very happy. But in any case, in addition to these extraordinary successes, he's really a very nice guy. And I'd like to ask you all to help me join me in welcoming Larry Summers back to Harvard.
Joe, thank you very, very much for that kind introduction. It's good to be home. I do remember speaking to groups of students at Harvard many, many times when I taught here, never with lights quite this bright or introductions quite that complimentary. It is one of the rewards of public office. It is very good to be here at the Kennedy School, which does so much to contribute to our national life, and which is such an important source of training, of inspiration, and of ideas for policymakers, not just in the United States, but around the world. I am continually struck as I travel around the world by the number of people who I meet who hold positions of substantial responsibility in their countries, who talk very fondly about the year they spent at the Kennedy School as a fellow of this kind or a fellow of that kind or a student in that program in some year in the past. I never appreciated in the time that I was here the extent of the influence that this university had in the things that it taught the remarkable group of people who study here and go on to do very important things around the world. What I wanted to speak about today was the new economy, what is new about it, and some of the things that are perhaps not so new about it, and what public policy challenges it poses for the years ahead. I do that because I am convinced that the choices our country makes in the next 5 to 10 years will be as significant for our country's economic future as the choices we've made in any 5-year period since the period immediately after the Second World War. I say that because of the magnitude of the budget surpluses that are now projected means that budgetary choices will be choices whose consequences can be measured in the trillions of dollars for the first time. I say that because, as Dean Nye knows well, we are in an era that people still call the post-Cold War era, but sooner or later will come to be defined for what it is rather than what it follows. And when it comes to be defined for what it is, will have an enormous impact on the way in which Americans live. And it is a period of enormously consequential choices because of the rate at which technology is changing economic processes. I think it is inconceivable that anyone running for president in 1992 thought that they would ever need to have a cloning policy or an internet privacy policy or an approach to managing domain names or many of the other public policy challenges that we have faced over the last 8 years. And I don't think we can know the full extent of the policy challenges that technology will put before us in the years ahead. When I try to think about what's new about the new economy, there's one experience I always come back to. Several years ago, I had occasion to travel to Africa to pursue the debt relief issues. And we went to visit a small village about 2 hours outside of Abidjan in the Côte d'Ivoire. And we went to that village on a large kayak that perhaps held 15 of us. And at that village, I had the occasion on behalf of the U.S. government to turn a switch and provide for the first water well that village had ever had that would provide steady, clean water. We were going back on the kayak, and somebody handed me a cell phone and said, "Bob Rubin has a question about the IRS budget." I said, "Oh, come on." He handed me the cell phone. There was Bob. "Larry, what do you think about the such and such on the IRS budget?" That was in 1997. And I thought back to the fact that I remembered another experience I'd had, which was in 1988, not usually thought of as the dark ages. And in 1988, I was in the back of a car in Chicago. And the car had a telephone. And I found that to be a sufficiently remarkable event that I called my wife and said, "I'm in a car with a telephone. Isn't this kind of neat?" And that was not an unreasonable thing to be doing in 1988. And 9 years later, there it was, 2 hours outside of Abidjan. Now, what comes together in that story? I think three things come together in that story. First, what new technology is doing to create new opportunity. Something I was reminded of in Mozambique when I asked, when I met a businessman and asked, "How's business?" And he said, "Okay now, but I'm worried about competition." And I said, "What do you do?" And he said, "I'm the internet provider here, but there may be more internet providers." So first, technology. Second, the rise of markets. You know something? It wasn't the state-owned telephone company of Cote d'Ivoire that had put that cell phone there. It was a private sector enterprise. And third, global integration. That literally we live in a world where distance and communication are getting so much easier. I remember that when I taught here, it was not so uncommon for people to mount a drive of some kind in which somebody would come to the professors and would try to get the professors to give copies of their old academic journals to whatever it was, and then the academic journals would be shipped on a freighter to Russia or to Africa, and they would be gradually distributed to universities at some point far away. When I visited Tanzania and visited an agricultural university 3 hours outside the capital, the professors there were all on the internet in connection with various American and European universities, and I discussed new techniques that had been developed for solving linear programming problems associated with maximizing agricultural production with the faculty there, who were in constant contact with the teachers in the universities at which they had taught. It really does make a difference in terms of how much the world is coming together. Technology and the embodiment of knowledge, the power of markets, global integration, these are the things that are changing our economy. And they are, in important respects, changing our conventional concepts in economics. Because many, not all of these goods have the special characteristic that they are not, that they are public goods, in the sense that my receiving knowledge doesn't detract from your receiving knowledge. As Thomas Jefferson put it, he who receives an idea from me receives instruction himself without lessening mine, as he who lights his taper at mine receives light without darkening me. Increasingly, if one thinks about software, if one thinks about pharmaceuticals, we are thinking about goods whose production will involve very large fixed costs and much smaller marginal costs. And increasingly, we are thinking about goods where their benefit to consumers will rise with the number that are in supply. A lonely fax machine probably has as its highest and best use serving as a doorstop. But 100,000 fax machines make 10 billion possible connections. This greater salience of knowledge, of technology, of low marginal costs has some important implications for business strategy and for the functioning of the economy as a whole. I suspect we will see more of the phenomena that engineers call positive feedback, that philosophers call self-fulfilling prophecy, and that what others call snowball effects become increasingly important. Indeed, this seems to be the case in our own economy, that in recent years has benefited from what might be called the information technology supply shock. Just as a rise in the price of oil, one crucial input, flowed through other sectors of the economy with enormous costs for consumers and businesses, resulting in higher inflation and higher unemployment in the 1970s. So in recent years, it has seemed that a rapidly declining price of information technology has had permeating effects through the economy with corresponding benefits in terms of lower unemployment, lower inflation, and higher productivity growth. Just as the supply shock from oil in the 1970s turned out to have much worse consequences for actual economic performance than were easily tracked by conventional economic models, so too it seems that the positive impact of this information technology shock has been rather larger than is easy to account for. How long will it last? It can be anybody's guess, but there do seem to be substantial benefits that lie ahead in the future. And it is, of course, a feature of exponential growth that each year's growth has a rising absolute impact. Go from 50 million internet users to 100 million users, that's 50 million more users. Enjoy the same rate of growth again, and you have an extra 100 million users. So far, in the United States at least, it appears that the effect of a larger base has been greater than any slowing in percentage growth. And so the impact of information technology on the economy has been a rising impact. Will this continue? That is a very difficult judgment to make, but it certainly does provide a remarkable moment of opportunity for us. How can we best take advantage of this remarkable moment of opportunity that has been created by the information technology supply shock, that has been created also by the successes of economic policy in recent years? I would highlight 5 core elements in a successful national economic strategy for the years ahead that respond to the questions I asked at the beginning. First, strong fiscal policies that crowd in investment rather than crowding it out. 10 years ago, we had an economy that appeared to be caught in a vicious cycle of high deficits, rising debt, high interest rates, slowing growth, lower tax collections, higher deficits, and around again. Somehow, the policy changes brought about in the early 90s, particularly in 1993, moved us over a kind of tipping point where that vicious cycle gave way to a virtuous circle, a circle of rising surpluses, diminishing debt, lower interest rates, more growth, rising revenues, and around again. And it is that change from vicious cycle to virtuous circle that created the room for the investments that embodied all of this technological change. You know, in an earlier era, when there were fewer profitable investment opportunities, trillions of dollars of savings that went into government paper rather than private investment was a lesser problem. In today's world, when the investment potential is greater, the benefits of increased saving and reduced government debt are greater. That is why it is overwhelmingly imperative that as we make our national economic choices, we not take for granted our current prosperity or our current projections, and that we not take steps that would diminish the very substantial room for private investment that our budget surpluses are now creating. Second crucial lesson for economic policy in this new economy is the overwhelming importance of investments in people, in education, and in technology. if investments in factories were the most important investments in an industrial age, surely the most important investments in an information age are investments in education. You know, if you look at the various trends in the economy over the last 20 years, few are more pronounced than the market return to increased education, the widening differential between those with more education and those with less. There's much to be said about the improvement in education that are necessary in the United States, and there is much that I suspect many people in this audience know much better than I. But let me just comment on one issue, because it is financial in nature, and that's this. We don't know everything we need to know about how to improve quality, about how to set standards, about how to provide for choices, about how to optimize the learning environment. But I'd suggest to you there's some things we do know. In the richest, most powerful country there's ever been, kids in public schools shouldn't have to go to class in renovated closets. There shouldn't be kids in the richest country there's ever been who start the school day at 4 in the afternoon because the school works on 3 shifts due to over-congested conditions. Shouldn't be. Shouldn't be in the United States today that any school cafeteria begins to serve lunch at 9:45 in the morning so it can accommodate all the traffic. And I could go on and on with stories like this. This is something we know how to solve. The right allocation of federal resources through the right combination of tax credits, through the right combination of appropriations, can give every kid a classroom that he can be proud of. And if we want our kids to take their education seriously, we can take their education seriously too by providing the right kind of facilities. Similar kind of remark applies probably even more clearly to the challenge of making teaching a valued and honored profession at a time when 1 million teachers are going to retire in the next decade. Third aspect of a new economy that comes very much out of the observations I made a few minutes ago about high fixed costs and low marginal costs is the need to make markets as large as possible. You know, think about it. In your textbook diagram, the supply curve slopes upwards, but orphan drugs actually cost much more than drugs that are very widely used. And bestsellers cost much less than academic monographs. Why? Because of more room to spread those fixed costs, something that comes from larger markets. Now, how can public policy influence the effective size of markets? Most importantly, by opening up the economy to the global economy. I suspect that in the years ahead it will be discovered by economists that the new economy benefits of spreading fixed costs and promoting differentiation are probably larger as we increase international trade than the traditional benefits suggested by comparative advantage theory. And I hope that we will increasingly come to understand that imports as well as exports are helpful in the global economy, and that in many ways imports have been the safety valve on a high-pressure U.S. economy in recent years. But expanding markets isn't just about the global economy and opening to the rest of the world. It is also about expanding the scale and the potential to take advantage of efficiency in our markets here. And that's why deregulation in key sectors, and particularly key network sectors, like telecommunications and financial modernization, has been so very, very important. And removing barriers that artificially constrict the size of markets has to be an important agenda item in the years ahead. Fourth, if education is one piece of an effective economic strategy for a knowledge-based economy, the other is effective investments in the production of knowledge. I was once told the story, and I haven't really checked whether it is absolutely right, but it's close enough to right to make the point. Suppose in 1600 you had wanted to make an investment in improving the navigation of ships around the world, and improving nautical safety, for all time in the future. What was the most productive investment you could have made? There'd be people who'd say better hulls, there'd be people who'd say better sails, there'd be people who'd say it was better ways to forecast the weather. I think you can make a very strong case. The most productive thing that happened was the development in pure mathematics of the concept of the square root of -1, which set the stage for Maxwell's equations, which set the stage for harnessing electricity and magnetism and creating radio. That is one of hundreds of examples demonstrating that the production of new knowledge has benefits that go far beyond anything that's envisioned at the time that the new knowledge is produced. To take another example, the techniques that keep your credit card number confidential and private when you buy a book from Amazon.com are derived from research that was in the abstract part of pure mathematics 15 years ago. What could be said about mathematics can be said about many other fields. A central priority is to recognize that we as a country need to invest adequately, and that means invest much more in the production of basic knowledge in the years ahead. And I would highlight a fifth priority. I think it's traditionally been a moral priority to say that everyone has to be included in our prosperity, that no one should be left behind. But today it is more than a moral issue. Why? Because the strength of our economy has created a situation where we have jobs looking for people as much as people looking for jobs. We went to see, bad things happen when you're away from Boston for too long. My family and I went to see an Orioles game last week. And there we were in this stadium with 39,000 other people. And this plane flew with a message. And I figured it was going to be trying to sell some kind of car or trying to sell something. But I actually read what the message said. The message was announcing a job fair on behalf of a number of companies. It's really quite a remarkable thing. People are paying large amounts of money to fly planes over stadiums telling people about jobs. That does not happen too frequently in modern economies. But what it tells us in an economy where jobs are looking for people is that one of the crucial constraints is these bottlenecks, is these shortages of skilled people. And so what is traditionally a moral imperative is also an economic imperative in terms of helping people move into work. And that needs increasingly to influence every area of public policy. Most obviously, our education policies. I see my friend David Elwood here. It means policies that move people effectively from welfare to work. It means the creation of family-friendly workplaces so that moms can raise their kids and work as well. It means creating incentives to target demand and investment to the parts of our national economy where there still are stagnant pools of labor and where there still are not jobs looking for people, but people looking for jobs, as the President's New Markets initiative has sought to do. These are very fortunate times. We probably in the United States have not had as strong an economy in the last century, and we probably have not been as strong relative to the rest of the world at any time, with the possible exception of the period right after the Second World War. But if history teaches us anything, it is that good times do not last automatically, and that the world doesn't stand still. That makes it especially important that we do the things necessary to maintain these good times and use them to build a stronger future. That's why I've emphasized the importance of the national choices that we will make with respect to maintaining our surplus, with respect to investing in our people, with respect to integrating with the rest of the world, with respect to producing knowledge, and with respect to including everyone. We can do those things right. The good times can get better. Thank you very much.
We now have time for questions. There are 4 microphones, 2 here on the floor, 2 in the balcony. I should point out to you that there will be a lot of people who want to ask questions. Therefore, keep your questions brief. Make sure there's a question mark at the end, and 1 per customer. And when you come to the microphone to ask a question, I'd like you to identify yourself and your role in the university. So let's start. I see in the balcony.
Sir, it's Amir Ataran from the Center for International Development here at Harvard. What strikes me in the vision you articulated, which is a rich one, is how it's all domestic. Under this administration, the U.S. has become the least generous per capita developed country in foreign aid, and aid has dropped to the least developed country so that it's $4 per American per year, which is the price of a sandwich. What would you think, if not perhaps for this administration, the next administration at least might have a chance to do to take your ample vision and move it abroad, share it equitably?
It's a very good question, and I'm glad you asked it. And the only excuse I can give for not making the case for a substantial increase in United States spending on international affairs as part of a case for global integration is a desire to confine my remarks a bit. You are absolutely right, and let me frame the point in a different way. We are spending about $100 billion a year less on national defense than we were at the end of the Cold War because that threat has receded. You can debate whether we should spend $100 billion of that $100 billion on forward defense of U.S. interests through foreign assistance programs, or $50 billion, or $20 billion, or $10 billion. But I would suggest to you that negative $5 billion out of that $100 billion to spend on forward defense of U.S. interests is an implausible figure. As a country, we should do more, and it seems to me that one of the things that is incumbent on all of us is to make that case to our fellow citizens, because there are enormous opportunities to make a difference. That's why perhaps our top legislative priority at Treasury in the next few weeks is the successful funding of the debt relief initiative that offers the prospect of doing a great deal for the people, in the poorest countries in this world.
Left balcony.
Hi, Mr. Summers. My name is Randy Sue, and I'm a freshman here who's thinking of concentrating in economics and computer science.
Good decision.
Anyway, thanks. My point was, I'm a big supporter of our public schools. I came from public school. But quite frankly, when I was in public school, I didn't like a lot of my teachers. Some of them were lazy. They went home at 3 every day. They didn't really care about the students. And I had some great teachers, but the pay scale was based entirely on seniority, so merit wasn't even considered. And I was just wondering, you were talking about teachers, giving our teachers more respect, like how the government can handle like this kind of situation, how it can improve on it, and how I guess government can learn from private industry, from the computer industry and those kind of industries to manage our school system better.
I don't think there's any question that we need to work to bring about more accountability in our schools and more rewards for effective performance, and probably more disincentives with respect to ineffective performance. And I think it's something that is very important to do. At the same time, I have to say that I have had occasion in Washington. Veterans Day is a federal holiday, but the schools are all open. And so every Veterans Day for the last few years, I've gone and spent the day sitting in my kids' classrooms. And I must say I've come away with the impression that teaching that many 7-year-olds or 8-year-olds or 9-year-olds or 10-year-olds is a lot harder job than I have. And I think as we think about what our public school teachers are paid and how they're treated, it behooves us all to remember that.
My name's Rena Miller. I'm a student in the International Development Program here at the Kennedy School. And my question is to you both as an economist and then separately as a politician. How do you see the role of military spending now in terms of affecting technological progress in the U.S.? Do you think that our military spending is still playing a key role in the development of technology, or is it excessive and should it be spent more on education? And if not, sort of as a politician, the former was more as an economist, as a politician, where do you see greater investment coming for public education?
One of the reasons, Joe mentioned that I had lasted a while in Washington. One of the reasons is that I learned that when somebody asked me, now we don't want your opinion as a public official, we just want your opinion as an economist, that I was being given an invitation to make a mistake. Seriously though, with respect to military spending, I think the right rule for us as a country is that we should decide what we need to spend on our national security, and that's how much we should spend. And we should not spend more because we think it'll create jobs, and we should not spend more because it'll create technology, and we should not spend less because we can't afford to spend what's necessary for our national security. The right focus is to make the judgment on national security and spend that amount. I think as far as making the case for more resources to public schools, that's what political argument is about. And that, frankly, is an issue where the candidates running in this election do have quite different visions of how much extra resources should be devoted to public education, and I think that gives voters a chance to express a view.
Hello, I'm Zachary Neumann. I'm a first year at the college. What do you believe is the greatest threat to our current economic prosperity, and what can we do to overcome it?
You know, when I think about our economy, I think that we're blessed with relatively sound fundamentals. But the things that I think need to concern us are our relatively low rate of saving and our consequent dependence on foreign capital. The danger that at a time when times have been good for quite some time, people will lose sight of the risks in economic life and enter into unrealistic and unsustainable spending plans that could cause complacency to be a self-denying prophecy. And I worry also about the longer-term social consequences of rising inequality as matters of concern. And I've tried to say a little bit about some of the things that I would do with respect to those problems. I think that probably maintaining our budget surpluses rather than assuming that we've got vast resources that can be given away is a particularly potent priority with respect to the problem of complacency.
Right thought.
My name is Mike Weissman. I work at the Kennedy School. E-commerce is expected to hit $7 trillion in about 5 years, according to most analysts. And in that light, the issue of sales tax and other taxation on e-commerce is very important, obviously. What would be your view on the issue of dealing with taxation of e-commerce in the context of more fundamental sort of tax reform, say on the scale of the Tax Act of 1986, or perhaps even transitioning away from a system of income taxation to something like a system of consumption taxation? And what do you think the possibility of that happening politically is?
One of the very good things, frankly, about getting out of Washington is one is exposed to a set of questions that are of a less incremental nature than are normally debated within the Beltway. Let me just say that I think most people would agree that the right principle that should guide the taxation of e-commerce is a notion of neutrality, that how much money you make or how much stuff you buy should influence how much taxes you pay, not the means by which you buy things. And that's a much easier principle to state than it is to figure out how to apply in a wide variety of contexts, but I think that's the right principle. And I think the other principle is that because of the kinds of network effects that I spoke about earlier, there's a fairly strong presumption that the benefits of connectivity are likely to be large and may well involve externalities. And so taxing connectivity per se is likely to be costly. As to the prospects for radical tax reform, I think it's difficult to make predictions, but I wouldn't see the radical overhaul of the tax code as likely in the next several years.
My name is Jay Nair. I'm a fourth-year student in the college. Sir, you were quoted a couple of weeks ago as being opposed to Secretary Richardson's proposal to release oil from the strategic petroleum reserves. Given the immediate...
Do you work at the Crimson?
No, given the immediate effect on prices, have you changed your opinion of any of the actions taken, or do you feel that the long-term effects will not be what were intended?
Gosh, it's great to be home. You know, at a certain time and in a certain context in the oil market, I did have very serious concerns about a particularly large approach to the use of the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. As I've said a number of times since then, you saw a number of conditions evolve in the oil market, particularly a great deal of anticipatory purchasing that seemed to be generated by the expectation of a price rise. You saw growing evidence of reduced inventories due to backwardation behavior. And in that context, the decision that the president took after consulting with all of his advisors to provide for a limited set of not releases from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, but swaps involving making oil available now and taking advantage of the backwardation in the market to assure that more oil was put back into the reserve is a very prudent and I think carefully considered step. And as for the impact on the oil market, I think we'll all have to watch oil market conditions for some time.
David Rosenthal, Mr. Secretary, physician at the Health Services and the Medical School. And my question is, you talked about leaving no one behind with respect to education, and obviously you must know that I'm going to ask you about health care. And you've been very helpful in providing the health care services and industry with a great amount of information and data about illnesses, especially when we were talking about tobacco control. And I'd like to ask you what your thoughts are and what your program are. How do we leave no one behind in health care?
Let me, David very modestly identified himself as a physician at the Health Services. As most of you know, he is the director of the Health Services, and as he knows very well, without his remarkable medical care, I would not be standing here. I mean that very seriously. David, I think you're obviously raising a crucial question, and one that I can't do justice to. The approach that we've settled on as a country, and I think all things considered, it is surely the necessary approach and probably the right approach, is rather than seeking a big bang solution, to try to proceed incrementally to make health care available to more people by building up from children and expanding eligibility under Medicaid and expanding coverage for those who are not eligible for Medicaid, and by addressing the prescription drug issue within Medicare, which is an issue that if the program were being invented today, it would be unthinkable that you would not have a prescription drug benefit within it. But it was invented 35 years ago at a time when pharmaceuticals were much less important in health care. And so more coverage for kids, better backstopping of the private insurance system for people who move for the periods when people are moving between jobs, and strengthening and fortifying Medicare are the current elements of our national approach. And they are, I think, very constructive elements. But I think this is a question where no one who immerses themselves deeply in it thinks we know all the answers, and where it is not easy to be satisfied with the progress that we're making, and where I'd have to say that the progress in my field of social science, in figuring out how to organize and maximize the delivery of health care, has rather lagged behind the progress in your field of medical science in devising new treatments for afflictions that were previously not treatable.
Thank you. My name is Josh. I'm a sophomore here. Mr. Secretary, I apologize in advance. This question isn't tough at all, and it's not even really about economics, but I would feel bad if I had the opportunity to speak to the Secretary of the Treasury and didn't ask this question. I have a $1 bill here, and it's signed by Lawrence H. Summers, Secretary of the Treasury. And my question, sir, is I'm curious, first of all, what it was like for you to sign this, what would become the $1 bill. And second, what it feels like every time you spend money that your signature is on.
My children refer to good money and bad money. Good money is that which has daddy's signature. Bad money is previous signature. Not long after I was privileged to be named as Secretary of the Treasury, I received a very powerful bit of policy advice, I think one might almost say, policy command from my mother. She informed that the dollar bills were going to be signed by Lawrence Summers rather than by Larry Summers, lest I get any ideas. Bill Clinton, that was fine. Jimmy Carter, that was fine, but her son was going to be Lawrence Summers on the dollar bills. It's not quite true, but when we had the ceremony, I was privileged to have the ceremony where I signed the plate and the first dollar bills with my name came off the press. I said that young actors dream of seeing their names in lights. Young economists dream of seeing their signature on the dollar bill.
Philip Cummings, a student on an executive program from Ireland. Are there any dark clouds ahead that could spoil the prosperity or surplus party, such as global warming or other sustainable issues that other industrial countries around the world are concerned about?
I think that there are. I think global warming is such an issue, and I think it's too bad that after a period when it was very much in view, it has so much receded from view in the last year or so. And my hope and frankly my expectation would be that you'll see some greater concern and commitment to act with respect to that problem. I think as one thinks about global challenges, though, the shorter run challenges of the AIDS pandemic in Africa and extreme global poverty right now stand out as particularly acute challenges.
Yes, my name's Alan Katz. I'm an MBA. I was wondering what direction interest rates are going to be in the short and long term.
Well, since you're wondering, I'll give you a prediction. They'll fluctuate. To make a slightly more contentful, but only slightly more contentful remark, one of the bases of our policy in the last few years, really since the president took office, has been respect for the independence of the Fed, because of the recognition that Fed bashing is, if you like, a fool's game. The Fed doesn't listen, and so short-term interest rates aren't changed. The market does, and so long-term interest rates go up. And it is in consistency with that policy, as well as the humility that's appropriate to an economist, that I decline to make any predictions about where interest rates will go.
Hello, my name is Mara Hernandez, and I come from Mexico. And as you may know, 20 million Mexicans live in the U.S., and it is said that along with many other migrant population, they have been responsible in part for the expansion, the incredible expansion of the U.S. economy because of the cheap labor they offered. And this has also brought, obviously, a lot of benefits to Mexico, and the money that the Mexicans living in the U.S. send to their families in Mexico has been growing in importance as a source of richness in our country. So I would like to know, in this mutually beneficial relationship, what do you think are the chances for eliminating restrictions or reducing restrictions, at least for labor mobility, especially after what Alan Greenspan said about how important that would be for further expansion in the U.S.?
It's a very good question, and it is obviously one that's very much connected with the sense of concern about bottlenecks with respect to labor. Of course, immigration carries with it enormous political sensitivities, and I don't feel in a position to knowledgeably forecast the direction in which things are likely to move in the near term. I think it's certainly fair to say that the strength in the economy creates more pressure for immigration, but just what form the pressure will be channeled into, don't know enough to be able to predict.
Hi, I'm Alex Grodd. I am a freshman here. And this being an election year, there's a lot of talk about budget surpluses. And as you know, there is still a massive federal debt. So my question for you is, would you make paying down the debt, fully paying down the debt, a priority, and how do you plan to go about doing it?
President's budget on the current projections would pay off the national debt in 2012. I think there are very substantial advantages to paying down debt of the kind I described in terms of crowding in investment and promoting growth and preparing us as a society to prepare for what will be a challenging period when the dependency ratio will be higher because a larger fraction of our population will be retired. I also think that the notion of counter-cyclical policy points towards paying down debt when times are good so that there's room to let automatic stabilizers operate if economic problems should ever come. So an important test of budget plans in the years ahead should be the rate at which they pay down debt, and the goal, given America's relatively low private savings rate, of eliminating the national debt seems to me a reasonable and appropriate one.
Hi, I'm Brevin Warren, and I'm a freshman here. 9 years ago, when you were vice president of the World Bank, you noted that, to quote your own words, the economic logic behind dumping a load of toxic waste in the lowest wage country is impeccable, and we should face up to that. I was wondering what your thoughts were on that issue, and if you still agree with that earlier assertion.
What was the last part of the question?
I was wondering if you still agree with that earlier assertion today.
Oh, I think I made clear the inappropriateness of that assertion about a week after it was a leak to the press, and that continues. My view that it was inappropriate continues to be my view. Clearly, no sane person would or should, say that the export per se of waste is the right or the moral policy. There are obviously difficult issues involved in the trade-offs that different countries at different levels of income will make between the benefits of production and the benefits of environmental reduction. And I think there are important issues to be studied and thought about with respect to interactions between environment and trade. But as I made clear at the time, that memo was not a thoughtful exploration of those issues, or satisfactory exploration of those issues.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. My name is Peter Buttigieg. I'm a first year here at Harvard College. Despite all the people they kill in the third world, cholera and tuberculosis are not the subject of major vaccine research by American pharmaceuticals. However, in the near future, there will be the release of a drug to treat separation anxiety for dogs. My question is, what steps can be taken, or concrete steps are being taken in American economic policy to ensure that even when we run up against the limits of the power of markets, that today's prosperity in the new economy means a tangible, qualitative human improvement worldwide and not just good business at home?
I'm glad you asked that question. We are working we have included in the President's budget, and we will be working in the next several weeks before Congress goes out of sessions to pass the President's vaccine tax credit. The President's vaccine tax credit is actually based on ideas that in many respects were developed here at Harvard. It starts from the premise that the reason for the anomalies you described in research are that market incentives are shaped by those who can pay and those who cannot pay. And therefore, the central element in the credit program is the creation of a purchase fund for vaccines that would only be used in the case of a successful development of a vaccine for cholera or tuberculosis or one of two or three other diseases that would match any payments made by aid agencies or foundations so as to create a larger market and therefore to motivate research. And for a variety of reasons, we believe that establishing the market in that way is probably likely to produce a stronger and more focused effort than simply strategies that subsidize research. And the question now is whether the Congress will respond to the President's call to support that measure. And that's why I very much welcome the interest of concerned citizens on this issue like yourself, and I hope as many as possible will make their concerns known.
Thank you.
Time for two more questions, the two here at floor mics.
Hi, I'm Matthew Iglesias, a sophomore in the college. There's been some speculation that you're a candidate to become the next president of Harvard. Is there any truth to that? Are you interested in the job?
Told you so.
I'm doing my job as Secretary of the Treasury. We face enormous economic opportunities and challenges, and that is my whole focus at this moment.
I have a question about a topic that isn't much discussed these days. At different times and perhaps for different reasons, Richard Nixon, Milton Friedman, and Ralph Nader have all expressed support for a national income guarantee, which gives people money to supplement low-wage jobs for low-skilled people, but doesn't create the kind of poverty traps that doomed the old welfare system. I'm wondering what you think of such a program.
I see at least several people in this room who know so much more about this topic than I do, that I speak with some trepidation. But I think that there has been some shift in the discussion away from the emphasis on the negative income tax. And that has been, I think, for basically good reasons, which were not fully understood at some of the moments when it was advocated. Most important reason is the reality that the poverty population differs very substantially in its supply response to changes in after-tax wages. and that providing a low marginal tax rate under the negative income tax requires a very high threshold, requires one to provide benefits up to a relatively high income level where most of the benefits aren't going to the poorest people. That is necessary if you are, and probably appropriate if you're talking about those with a relatively high elasticity. It is not appropriate with respect to those for whom the elasticity is likely to be very low. For that reason, the differing circumstances make differing marginal tax rates appropriate. Because there actually are good reasons for thinking that there are some greater values associated with spending by the poor on some things rather than other things, which makes a case for in-kind assistance. And for a number of other more technical reasons, I think there is much more support today among students of these issues for a more categorical and differentiated approach, and more emphasis on the provision of services so as to encourage people to move from welfare to work, and more emphasis on creating negative marginal tax rates for people in the critical region who can work, as we do through the EITC. So I would be quite surprised if the negative income tax as an idea were to reemerge as a major idea in American public policy debate in the next few years.
Well, Larry, I am pleased to see from this evening's performance that Washington hasn't dulled in the least your academic acuity, and that returning to Harvard hasn't dulled in the least your Washington political skills, which means that we will always welcome you back at the Kennedy School at any time. So thank you very much.